Hey everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk Taxes. We're going to be tackling a topic that I think a lot of people find really confusing.
Yeah.
And luckily we have experts here to guide us through it.
hmm
We're talking about college tax credits.
Yes, that's right. We're from Tax Service LLC.
All right, perfect. So let's dive in.
Sounds good.
We are focusing on two big players here, the American Opportunity Credit and the Lifetime Learning Credit.
Hmm.
And, you know, navigating college costs these days can be really daunting.
It can.
But, these credits are designed to kind of make education a little more affordable.
Yeah, before we get into the specifics of each credit, maybe we should take a step back and explain what a tax credit is.
Yeah, for sure.
You can think of it as a dollar-for-dollar reduction of your tax liability. So if you owe, let's say, $1,000 in taxes and you have a $500 tax credit, you'll only end up owing $500.
Oh, okay. So it's not like a deduction.
Exactly. A deduction reduces your taxable income, which then reduces your tax liability, but a credit is a direct reduction of the taxes you owe.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Now let's talk about that American Opportunity Credit.
Sure.
It offers up to $2,500 per eligible student, which is, not an insignificant amount.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize this, but even if your income is above the phase-out limit, you might still qualify for a partial credit.
Really?
Yes. So it's always worth looking into.
Interesting.
Now, the way it's calculated is you get 100% back on the first $2,000 you spend on qualified expenses, and then 25% back on the next $2,000. So to max out that $2,500 credit, you'd need at least $4,000 in qualifying expenses.
So front-loading those expenses could be a good idea.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Especially in those first 4 years of college.
Okay, gotcha. And then there's that refundable portion, right?
Yes. Up to $1,000 of the American Opportunity Credit is refundable.
What does that mean?
It means that even if you don't owe any taxes, you could still get up to $1,000 back.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is. It's essentially a bonus from the government.
So are there any eligibility requirements for this credit?
Yes. For the American Opportunity Credit, the student has to be pursuing a degree enrolled at least half-time, and it has to be within their first 4 years of higher education.
So it's really geared towards those initial undergraduate years.
That's right.
Okay. Now, what about the Lifetime Learning Credit? How is that different?
Well, the Lifetime Learning Credit is a little bit different. It's worth up to $2,000, so a bit less than the American Opportunity Credit, but it's a non-refundable credit, meaning it can reduce your tax liability to zero, but it won't result in a refund.
I see.
But it does offer more flexibility in terms of what it covers.
Like what?
You can use it for undergraduate courses, graduate studies, and even professional development courses.
So it's good for, lifelong learners, as the name suggests.
Exactly. It's calculated as 20% of the first $10,000 in educational expenses.
Okay. So it sounds like it could be a good option for someone who's maybe, going back to school to get a second degree or taking some courses to enhance their career.
Definitely. Now let's talk about what actually qualifies as an educational expense.
Yeah, because I know that can be kind of tricky.
It can be. The most common expenses are tuition and fees.
Right, of course.
But you can also include things like textbooks, required supplies, and even equipment like computers.
Oh, that's great. Textbooks can be so expensive.
They can, and it's important to remember that room and board are not included.
Okay.
So it's really those direct educational costs that qualify.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What about expenses that are paid with student loans? Do those count?
Yes, they do. Even if you take out loans to pay for college, you can still claim these tax credits.
Oh, that's good to know.
Now, there are some limitations to keep in mind.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Well, any scholarships or grants you receive will reduce the amount of expenses you can claim.
So you can only claim the amount that you actually paid out of pocket or with loans.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's really important to factor in any financial aid you're receiving when you're calculating these expenses.
All right, so we've talked about the two main credits, what expenses qualify, and some of the eligibility requirements. But I'm sure a lot of people are wondering who actually gets to claim these credits. Is it always the student?
Well, it depends on whether the student is claimed as a dependent on someone else's tax return.
Ah, okay.
So if the student is claimed as a dependent, typically by their parents, then the parents would claim the credit on their return.
So, for example, if I'm still claiming my son on my taxes, I would get to take advantage of the credit.
Exactly.
But if my son files his own tax return independently, then he can claim the credit himself.
That's right.
Okay, so it really just depends on who's ultimately responsible for those educational expenses.
Exactly.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I know that tax forms can be really intimidating.
They can be.
So what are some of the key forms that people should be looking for when it comes to claiming these credits?
Well, the first one is Form 1098-T,
Uh,
and this form comes from your educational institution. It outlines the tuition and fees that you paid.
so it's basically a summary of all your educational expenses.
That's right.
Okay. And then is there a specific form to actually claim the credits?
Yes,
Hmm.
Form 8863.
80-63.
That's the one where you'll calculate and claim the education credits.
Okay. So make sure to grab those forms.
Definitely.
All right. Well, this has been really helpful. I feel like I'm starting to get a better handle on these credits.
I'm glad to hear that.
But I know we've just scratched the surface here.
There's a lot more to explore.
Yes. So we'll definitely be diving deeper into some specific scenarios and examples in the next part of our deep dive.
That's right. We'll be back.
So stay tuned. Welcome back to Let's Talk Taxes. We're still deep diving into college tax credits with the experts from Tax Service LLC.
It's great to be back.
So I had a question. You know what? If my tax liability is already really low, are these credits even worth it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is often yes. Even if you're only owing a small amount, let's say like $500,
Yeah.
and you qualify for a $2,000 credit, that credit will completely wipe out your tax liability.
Oh, so you could end up owing nothing.
That's right. And in the case of the American Opportunity Credit, remember that refundable portion we talked about, you could actually receive money back even if you owed zero taxes to begin with.
So that's a pretty big deal.
It can be. It really highlights how these credits can benefit a wide range of taxpayers and not just those with high tax liabilities.
Right, right. It's all about making education more accessible no matter your income.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned the refundable portion of the American Opportunity Credit. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So most tax credits are non-refundable, meaning they can reduce your tax liability to zero,
Right.
but no further. But with the American Opportunity, credit up to $1,000 can actually be returned to you as a refund.
Even if you had no tax liability to begin with.
Yeah, so it's almost like a direct subsidy from the government to help with those college costs.
You could say that.
This is really helpful information. I feel like I'm starting to wrap my head around these credits a little bit better.
Well, that's what we like to hear. We love demystifying these tax strategies.
And I bet a lot of people listening right now are probably thinking, I wish I knew about this sooner.
You know, it's never too late to double check and potentially get some money back. The IRS allows you to amend your tax return.
Really?
Yes, for up to 3 years after the original filing deadline.
Wow, so even if you've already filed your taxes, you can still go back and claim a credit that you missed.
That's right. And that's where having a tax professional can be really helpful. They can review your past returns and make sure you're not missing out on any opportunities.
Okay, that's a great point.
Especially for something like these education credits, which can be pretty valuable.
So what's your biggest piece of advice when it comes to these college tax credits?
I would say plan early. Don't wait until the last minute to start thinking about your taxes.
Right.
The more prepared you are, the smoother the process will be, and the more likely you are to take advantage of all the benefits that are available.
That's such good advice. Thanks again to Tax Service for joining us on this deep dive into college tax credits.
It's been our pleasure. We love talking about taxes.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll continue our discussion with more real-world examples and expert insights. So stay tuned. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into college tax credits, and I'm so glad we have the experts from Tax Service LLC here with us today.
We're happy to be here.
So one thing I've been thinking about is, what happens if you know someone's already filed their taxes, and then they realize, oh, wait a minute, I think I might have qualified for one of these credits. Is it too late at that point?
That's a great question, and luckily the answer is not necessarily.
Okay.
You can actually amend your tax return for up to 3 years after the original filing deadline.
Oh, wow. So there's still hope.
There is. So if you realize you missed out on a credit, you can file an amended return to claim it.
That's good to know. And I imagine that having a tax professional could be really helpful in that situation.
Absolutely. They can review your past returns and help you identify any potential missed opportunities like these education credits.
Right, because sometimes it's hard to know what you don't know.
Exactly. The tax code is complex. There's a lot to keep track of.
For sure. So it's always a good idea to have an expert in your corner.
We like to think so.
Well, this has been such an informative conversation. I feel like I've learned so much today.
We're glad to hear that.
But I know we're just about out of time. So any final words of wisdom for our listeners when it comes to these college tax credits?
My biggest piece of advice would be to plan early. Don't wait until the last minute to start thinking about your taxes, especially when it comes to education expenses. The more prepared you are, the smoother the process will be, and the more likely you are to maximize those tax benefits.
Such great advice. Thanks again to Demore Tax Service LLC for joining us today on this deep dive into college tax credits.
It was our pleasure. We always enjoy talking about taxes.
And for our listeners, if you want to learn more about Demore Tax Service LLC and the services they offer, be sure to visit their website at demoretaxservice.com.
You can find lots of helpful resources there.
All right, well, that wraps up another episode of Let's Talk Taxes. We hope you found this deep dive informative and empowering. And remember, stay informed, stay savvy, and keep those tax refunds rolling in. Thanks for listening.